Watch this if you haven't told anyone how you really are. Carl Jung Psychology. Carl Jung observed that the ache of carrying something you have never said out loud is not a flaw in your character. It is one of the oldest and most ordinary conditions of the human psyche. Here is where we begin, and I want to give you the exact line before we go any further. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections. In each of us, there is another whom we do not know, and he meant it plainly, not poetically. There is a person living inside you who has never been introduced to anyone, not your closest friend, not your partner, sometimes not even fully to yourself. And Jung would stop you right there and say, "Do you see it?" The loneliness you feel is not proof that you are unlovable or strange. It is simply what happens when that other one inside you has never once been spoken aloud, and something in that should land gently on you, because if the ache is not proof of your defect, then it is not something to hide from either. It is only a signal, and signals can be read. And I want you to notice something else in that same sentence. Jung did not say, there is a stranger hiding inside you who must be exposed or confessed or dragged into the light against its will. He said, there is another whom we do not know, which is closer to a quiet housemate you have never sat down with, someone who has been living in the same rooms as you for years, cooking in the same kitchen, sleeping under the same roof, and yet whom you have somehow never once properly met. That is a very different feeling from shame. It is closer to a missed introduction, and missed introductions can always, eventually, still happen. So here is where I want you to just sit with me for a moment. 3 small admissions. Said only to yourself, first, I admit there is a version of me that has never been fully spoken. Second, I admit I have mistaken that silence for shame when it was only ever unfamiliarity. Third, I admit the work now is not to perform myself louder for the world, but to become honest with the one who already lives inside me. And this is the whole of Jung's labor in a single sentence. So say it with me. I make the unconscious conscious. And again, I make the unconscious conscious. If you want tomorrow's teaching to find you the way this one did, staying close by subscribing is a quiet way to keep the door open. And if something in you just went quiet while I said that, if some old untold thing in you stirred even slightly, type the words "face it" in the comments. Just those 2 words. Let it be your seal that you heard it. The first key is this. The loneliness you carry is not the absence of people. Jung wrote it exactly this way. Loneliness does not come from having no people about one, but from being unable to communicate the things that seem important to oneself. Read that again slowly. You can be surrounded, married, with a full calendar and 3 group chats going, and still carry this particular cold, because it has nothing to do with how many bodies fill the room, and everything to do with whether the thing that matters most to you has ever found a mouth. Picture an ordinary Tuesday evening, dinner with people who genuinely love you. Someone asks how your week was, and you say fine, busy. You know how it is. The table nods and moves on. Nothing about that looks like loneliness from the outside. There is laughter, there is company, but underneath fine and busy sits the actual week you had, the quiet dread on Sunday night, the thought at 3 in the morning, the grief you have not named even to yourself. None of it made it to the table, not because anyone stopped you, but because you have never built the sentence that could carry it without sounding strange, so you set it down again, politely, and go home fed and accompanied, and somehow no less alone than before. That is the exact mechanism Jung described. A real self, with no available channel, and it repeats quietly. The same evening comes again on Thursday, each time the untold thing a little more practiced at. The second key is this. Solitude and loneliness are not the same animal, and Jung learned the difference as a boy. Long before he had language for any of it, he recalled in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, that as a child, he carved a small mannequin out of wood, blackened it with ink to look like a tiny figure in a frock coat, and hid it inside a pencil case at the top of the house, along with a smooth oblong stone he had painted. And he told absolutely no one, not his parents, not a single friend, He wrote his own secret language for it, tiny scrolls he alone could read, and he visited it in private, whenever the world outside felt like too much. That mannequin was his first experience of an inner sanctum, a chamber inside himself that belonged to no one else. And here is the turn. That hidden ritual did not make him lonelier, it made him less lonely, because it gave the unspeakable something to live inside, besides raw exposure or total suppression. Notice what he did not do. He did not run to a parent and demand they understand his strange inner world. And he did not simply swallow the feeling and pretend it was not there. He built it a home, small, private, entirely his own. And only decades later did he even write about it publicly. This is the difference. The second key is asking you to notice. Isolation is when the untold thing has nowhere to go and simply starves in the dark. Solitude is when you build it a small room of its own, where it can exist honestly, even before you are ready to hand it to another person. And this distinction matters enormously in ordinary adult life, because so many people, sensing the ache of the untold self, conclude the answer must be to force disclosure immediately, to tell someone, anyone, right now, before they have even given the thing a shape they themselves understand, and this often backfires. The words come out tangled, the listener responds badly, and the person concludes that the very act of having an inner life is dangerous, when what was actually missing was simply a private stage of incubation first. So ask yourself plainly, do you have anything like that mannequin, a private page, a folder no one opens, a walk you take where you finally let your face be honest, a drawer, a playlist, a room in the house that is quietly yours? If you do not, that absence is not a character flaw either. It is simply an underused room in the house of you, waiting to be furnished. Solitude is a room I am allowed to keep for myself. The third key is this, and it needs a little more unfolding, because it corrects a mistake almost everyone makes about their own untold thing. They assume the reason they have never said it is that it is shameful, ugly, disqualifying, something that would make people recoil if it ever saw daylight. But far more often, the real reason is simpler and stranger than shame. It does not fit any of the categories the world has handed you to speak in. And Jung would want you to notice how literal this is. So let us walk one ordinary Tuesday together and watch it happen in real time. At 7 in the morning you are packing lunches or answering the first emails, and you wear the capable one, the one who has it handled. At noon, you sit with a coworker over sandwiches, and you wear the easygoing one, the one with no real complaints. At 6, you call your mother, because it is Tuesday, and you always call on Tuesday. And you wear the good child, steady, reassuring, asking about her garden. At 8, you are on a date, or texting someone you are seeing, and you wear the interesting one, the one whose life sounds full. And at 11, alone, scrolling in the dark, you wear nothing at all. And that is usually the only hour of the day the real weather in you is even visible to yourself. None of these 5 versions of you were lies. Jung was careful never to call the mask a crime. The mask negotiated with the world is a tool, not a betrayal. He called it the persona, a necessary garment for moving through society. And there is nothing dishonest about wearing a coat suited to the weather outside. But watch what happens to the thing that does not fit inside any of those 5 rooms. The fear that would sound unprofessional at work, the doubt that would frighten your mother, the grief that would ruin the date, the exhaustion that does not photograph well for anyone. It gets set aside, quietly, not because it is forbidden by decree, but simply because none of the rooms available to you that day were built with a door wide enough to let it through. And here is the quiet tragedy hiding inside that ordinary Tuesday. The untold thing does not grow smaller from being set aside. It grows stranger, month after month, year after year, until you start to feel a kind of estrangement, even from your own experience, because you have never once heard it spoken back to you in a human voice, in a human room. Imagine this compounding over a full decade, the same 5 rooms, the same 5 costumes, worn thousands of times, and somewhere in a 6th unbuilt room, A decade of untold material simply accumulating, unclaimed, and eventually a person in this position begins to wonder, quietly and with some alarm, whether they even know who they actually are anymore, beneath all the well-fitted coats. This is why Jung insisted that meeting oneself is not one dramatic confession made once and finished. It is closer to slow translation work, the patient search for a room, a person, a page, a quiet hour, where that specific unclassified content is finally permitted its own shape and its own name. So pause with me for a moment right now, and try this honestly. Pick one true thing about your life, something real, that you have never said aloud to another human being. Do not decide yet whether you will ever say it. Only notice, as you hold it quietly in your mind, whether your chest tightens or loosens at the thought of it existing outside you. That single small sensation will tell you more about why you have kept it hidden than months of guessing ever could. Because it is not shame that silences you. It is the absence of a room built to hold it. The fourth key is this: chosen solitude, at its best, is not withdrawal, it is design. And Jung practiced exactly this late in his own life. In 1957, in his 80s, he wrote to a friend named Schmaltz, declining a visit, and said something remarkably plain. Solitude is for me a fount of healing. Not an escape from people, a fount, something you return to on purpose, because it restores you. Notice the discipline in that. A world-famous man in his 80s still said no, gently, because he knew the untold parts of a life need quiet cultivation before they can be safely handed to anyone else. And there are two kinds of no here, though they look identical from outside. One no is collapse. The door shuts because you have nothing left, and the untold thing stays exactly where it was, untouched, only postponed. The other no is architecture, chosen the way you leave a room unfurnished on purpose, so something can later be built there undisturbed. Imagine a woman who spends her week answering to everyone: manager at the office, mother at home, good daughter on the weekly call. And one Sunday, she starts closing the door for 40 minutes before anyone wakes. Not to sleep, not to scroll, just to sit with cold coffee and let whatever wants to surface actually surface. At first, nothing. Then slowly, week by week, honest things arrive. A grief never processed. A hope she was embarrassed to admit. None of it needed an audience yet. Only an appointment kept with herself. That is the fount Jung meant. Plain, unremarkable. A chair by a window, and 40 minutes nobody else may schedule over. And inside that hour, an untold self gets its first honest hearing. This matters because many treat their need for solitude as social failure, as though always being reachable were the healthy thing. But Jung was no hermit. He lectured, he traveled, he kept deep friendships his whole life, and still protected this fount deliberately, refusing good invitations without apology, because a life with no unfurnished room in it eventually has nowhere left to put anything true. So ask yourself this week, when did you last take time alone, not to escape people, but to actually meet yourself in it? That fount does not run on someone else's schedule. It runs on yours. My solitude is not a wound, it is a fount I return to on purpose. If tomorrow's teaching should find you the same way this one did, subscribing is the simplest way to leave that door open. And I would be glad for the company, as we keep walking through this together. The fifth key is the deepest one, so let it unfold in pieces. Because there are really 3 movements inside it, and each one turns the same key a little further. First, consider why you actually stopped telling anyone in the first place. It is rarely because no one asked. It is almost always because of a specific fear. The fear that once the words leave your mouth, they will come out smaller or stranger than the thing itself. And that fear is not paranoid. It is often true. Words are blunt instruments built for ordinary daylight traffic. Buy this, meet me there, I am fine. Not for the strange weather of the unconscious. So when you finally try to say the real thing, and it comes out clumsy, or the listener's face does the wrong thing, you feel doubled, first by the original ache, and now by the failed attempt to share it. And so the sensible part of you concludes, Better to say nothing at all than risk that second wound. This is not cowardice, it is a nervous system doing math, and the math has usually been right at least once, which is exactly why the pattern took hold. Notice, too, how the rehearsal works. You compose the sentence in the shower, edit it in the car, soften it, sharpen it. Imagine 3 reactions and prepare defenses for each, and by the time an opening appears, you have already exhausted yourself on a conversation that never left your own head. So you let the real one pass, and file it under later, and later has a way of becoming never. And if you trace this back far enough, you will often find one specific memory, a moment years ago when you did try. When you handed someone an early, honest sentence and the room did not hold it well, a parent changed the subject, a friend laughed wrong, a partner grew uncomfortable and never asked again, and that single early failure wrote a rule into you that has been running in the background ever since. Better to keep it inside than risk that flinch again. Second, consider what actually happens to the untold thing while you keep it silent. Jung's clinical life pointed to one uncomfortable fact. Unspoken material does not quietly dissolve from neglect. It goes underground. And material that lives underground long enough starts behaving almost like its own small entity inside you, arising in the tone you take with someone you love, in tears during a movie that was not really about you, in anger over something trivial that was never really about the dishes. Imagine an ordinary Tuesday. A man wakes, answers emails, holds a calm meeting, buys groceries, laughs at the right places at dinner, and somewhere underneath sits one sentence he has never said to his own brother. By 9 that night he is short with his daughter over a spilled glass of water, sharper than the moment could justify, and he tells himself he is simply tired. But the untold sentence had to go somewhere, and it chose the spilled water because the spilled water was standing nearest. This is close to what Jung meant when he wrote in Ion that when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside. As fate, the untold thing does not stay obediently in its drawer. It leaks sideways into your life and calls itself bad luck, or a bad mood, or just how I am, when really, it is the pressure of something with no legitimate exit, and this leaking rarely looks dramatic. It disguises itself as personality, the person who is simply short-tempered, who simply does not do well with certain topics, who simply avoids a particular relative at holidays, each small avoidance feeling like a fixed fact about who they are, rather than the visible edge of something larger sitting just beneath the surface. Ask honestly now, is there a mood, a reaction, a pattern in you that seems to arrive from nowhere, a tightness at a certain gathering, a coldness with a certain person, and consider whether it might be the leaking edge of exactly the thing you have never said. The fate Jung described is rarely dramatic. It is usually this small: a short answer, a closed door, a headache arriving right on schedule whenever a certain subject nears the surface. Third, and this is the part most people get backwards, the cure is not to announce yourself to everyone. Jung never taught total disclosure as some kind of hygiene. He was too respectful of the fact that not every room deserves your unfinished self. Some listeners will only handle your real sentence carelessly, and handing it to the wrong room too soon can teach you the false lesson that the sentence itself was the mistake, when really, it was only the room. The actual turning point comes from one true instance of being received, not a crowd, one person. Sometimes not even a person. Sometimes a page in a private notebook. Sometimes the analytic hour itself, where for 50 minutes a week, someone was simply present enough to hear the untold thing without flinching. What changes you is not volume. It is quality. One honest sentence, spoken to one steady listener, or written where it can be looked at again later, does more for the ache of loneliness than 100 surface conversations ever could. And notice what that one reception actually does. It does not erase the fact that you carried this thing alone for so long, but it proves, finally, with evidence rather than hope, that the thing was survivable outside of you as well as inside you, and that proof cannot be argued into you beforehand. It can only be earned once, by one real telling, and once earned even a single time, something shifts permanently, because now you carry not only the untold thing, but the memory that it was once received without disaster. And that memory becomes a quiet permission you can return to whenever the old fear rises again. This is the communicability audit I want to leave you with. Take a slow inventory this week, not of everyone you know, but of the one place, the one page, the one person, where the real content of your life might actually survive being said. You do not need an audience, you need one true reception. And if you cannot yet find a person for it, a private page will do for now. The page cannot flinch. It cannot rush to reassure you before it has understood you. It will simply hold the shape of the thing exactly as you gave it, until you are ready for a human ear. This is not therapy, and it is not a diagnosis of anything wrong with you. It is only what Jung called making the darkness conscious. One small, honest sentence at a time. Tuesday's spilled water was never really about the water, and your late-night sharpness was never really about whatever it landed on. It was the untold thing asking, in the only language it had left, to finally be let out through the front door instead of the cracks in the wall. I owe the untold parts of me one true listener, even if that listener, for now, is only the page. The sixth key is this, and it is the gentlest one. The self you have never told anyone about does not need to be broadcast to the whole of your life to be healed of its loneliness. It needs only one honest sentence, spoken once. Somewhere, it will be received with steadiness rather than alarm. That is all Jung ever really asked of anyone. Not confession as spectacle, not oversharing as proof of growth, only the quiet, deliberate act of letting one true thing meet one steady witness. And let me make this concrete, because it is easy to nod along and still walk away doing nothing. Imagine an ordinary Tuesday evening. You are washing a single plate at the sink. Your partner or your friend is in the next room. And some small true thing rises in you. Maybe it is nothing more than, I have felt distant from myself lately. Or, I do not think I am as fine as I have been saying. Most weeks that sentence dies quietly at the back of your throat. You swallow it. You ask instead if they want tea. And the evening closes the way 10,000 evenings before it have closed. Nothing dramatic, nothing wrong. Exactly. Just one more untold thing filed away. Now imagine instead, you let that single sentence out. Not the whole confession, not years of explanation, just the one true line. And you watch the other person's face stay steady, does not flinch, does not rush to fix you, only receives it. That is the entire mechanism. That is the whole of what Jung meant. The room did not get bigger. The audience did not grow. Only one true thing finally touched one steady surface and did not shatter. And here is what most people miss. You do not need to find the perfect listener before you try this. You need only find one steady enough for one sentence. The page can be that listener while you are looking. A single line in a notebook, written honestly instead of performed, is already the beginning of this same healing. Because the healing was never about who hears it. It was about the fact that it was finally said outside of you, rather than endlessly circling inside you. And consider how small the actual unit of change really is here. Not a life overhaul, not a grand reveal at a family dinner, only one sentence, offered once, to one steady place. And then, if it goes well, perhaps a second sentence some weeks later, and then a third, each one a little easier than the last, because each successful telling slowly rewrites that old rule laid down by the early flinch, proving, quietly and repeatedly, that the untold self is not in fact too much for the world to hold. So this week, resist the urge to wait for the perfect moment or the perfect confidant. The untold self has waited long enough already. Let it out in the smallest possible form. One sentence, one page, or one person. And notice how much lighter the rest of the evening becomes once that single true thing is no longer only yours to carry. That lightness is the whole reward, and it asks nothing more of you than honesty in miniature. I offer the untold part of me to one honest witness, and I let that be enough. Here is the whole picture. Loneliness is not the absence of people, it is the absence of one true telling. Solitude is a room I am allowed to keep, not a failure to belong. The untold thing is not shameful, it simply never found a room built to hold it. Chosen quiet is a fount I return to on purpose, not a wound I hide inside. Silence held too long leaks sideways and calls itself fate. And one honest sentence, given to one steady listener, closes more distance than a lifetime of performing ever could. And if you look closely, you will see all 6 of these were never 6 separate keys at all. They were one single turning, again and again, of the same lock, the recognition that you were never too strange to be known, only unintroduced, and every true sentence you finally speak is simply that introduction, arriving late, but arriving so say it with me once more, in your own quiet way. Not the same words twice, but the same spirit. That the work now is not to hide the unspoken self more carefully, but to let it be found, gently, by someone willing to stay, and that the whole of this teaching lives in the same simple act it has always lived in. The darkness does not need to be feared into silence, it needs to be met, and known, and finally, in one small true sentence, spoken. So before you close this, ask yourself honestly, if you have never told anyone how you really are, who might be steady enough tonight to hear the first true sentence of it?